Have you ever noticed that when people talk about coming out later in life, they usually stop the story at the moment someone says, I'm gay? Almost every movie ends there. Every documentary celebrates that moment as if the credits are supposed to roll immediately afterward. The music gets louder, everyone hugs, and somehow we're expected to believe that life suddenly becomes easier. I wish somebody had told me that wasn't the ending. For me, that was the day the construction project began. Coming out wasn't the hardest thing I ever did. It wasn't even the most confusing. The hardest part came the following morning when I woke up, looked around, and quietly asked myself, now what? Nobody had prepared me for that question. Nobody told me that coming out at 60 wasn't just about telling people who I was. It was about rebuilding almost every part of the life I had spent decades creating. Looking back now, I almost laugh at how naive I was. I thought I was opening one door. Instead, I accidentally knocked down an entire wall. You see, when you've spent 30 or 40 years living one version of your life, that life becomes more than routines. It becomes your world. You know where you belong. You know who calls on your birthday, where Christmas dinner happens, which pew you sit in at church, who your neighbors are, where you vacation every summer. You know the restaurants where everybody recognizes your face before they even ask what you'd like to order. Life becomes wonderfully predictable. Then one day, you decide to tell the truth, and suddenly, predictability packs its bags and leaves without saying goodbye. Now, before anyone misunderstands me, let me say something that is incredibly important. I am not telling you that coming out ruined my life. Not even close. Coming out gave me my life. What it took away was the instruction manual I had been following for decades. That's a very different thing. Some people remained in my life exactly as they had always been. Others surprised me with kindness I never expected. But some relationships quietly faded away. There wasn't always a dramatic argument. Sometimes there wasn't even a goodbye. The phone simply stopped ringing. Invitations became less frequent. Conversations became shorter. There are friendships that don't survive change, and sometimes nobody is the villain. People simply continue walking in different directions until one day they realize they can no longer see each other. That hurts. But it wasn't the end of the story. It was simply the beginning of another one. The funny thing is that nobody hands you a brochure explaining what comes next. Imagine if they did. Congratulations on coming out. Please proceed to window number 3 where you'll receive your starter kit. Inside, you'll find one new social circle, 2 emotionally available friends, a list of trustworthy therapists, 3 excellent vacation destinations, 1 welcoming church, and a coupon for half-price brunch. Wouldn't that have been nice? Instead, you leave the closet carrying absolutely nothing except yourself. And that, my friends, is both terrifying and beautiful. One of the biggest surprises for me was realizing how many parts of my old life had been connected to my previous identity. I had never questioned them because they had always been there. My routines weren't just routines, they were habits built over decades. My friendships weren't just friendships, they had grown alongside my marriage, my family, and the community where everyone knew me as a husband, a father, and a neighbor. When those pieces started changing, I discovered something unexpected. I wasn't just looking for acceptance. I was looking for a place to belong. Those are 2 completely different things. Being accepted means people allow you to exist. Belonging means you can finally exhale. It took me a while to understand that. At first, I thought I needed to replace everything immediately. New friends, new routines, new places. I was treating my life like someone who had just moved into an empty apartment. Every room felt unfinished. Every silence felt too loud. Then, one afternoon, while sitting alone with a cup of coffee, I realized something that changed the way I looked at all of this. Nobody was coming to build my new life for me. That responsibility belonged to me. Nobody was going to knock on my door and say, "Michael, we've assembled your new community. They're waiting downstairs." No. If I wanted friendships, I had to introduce myself. If I wanted community, I had to show up. If I wanted peace, I had to stop comparing my new life to the one I had left behind. That was harder than I expected. You know what nobody tells you about starting over later in life? You become a beginner again. And let me tell you something. Becoming a beginner at 60 feels very different than becoming a beginner at 20. At 20, you think, this is exciting. At 60, you think, do I really have to learn another password? Everything felt new. I had to learn where older gay men actually spent their time. Contrary to what Hollywood would have you believe, they aren't all dancing shirtless on a rooftop somewhere. Many of them are trying to find parking close to the restaurant entrance because their knees have opinions now. I had to discover new communities, new events, new conversations. I had to learn a culture that, in many ways, had been developing while I was living a completely different life. I still remember walking into certain places feeling like the new kid at school. Except this time, the new kid had reading glasses. There were moments when I felt wonderfully out of place. People talked about events I'd never attended, places I'd never visited, experiences I had never lived. Every now and then, I'd smile politely while secretly wondering if there was a dictionary somewhere explaining all the vocabulary I had apparently missed over the last 40 years.
There should really be one.
Chapter 1. What exactly is a drag brunch, and why does everyone seem so excited about it? Chapter 2. Why is everyone recommending moisturizer? Chapter 3. Stretch before dancing. Trust me. I laugh about it now because humor became one of my greatest survival skills. If you can't laugh at yourself while learning an entirely new chapter of life, you're going to spend far too much time feeling embarrassed. And embarrassment is a terrible travel companion. Slowly, almost without noticing, things began to change. The unfamiliar started becoming familiar. The places that once felt intimidating became comfortable. The conversations became easier. The faces became recognizable. And then, one day, something happened that I didn't expect. I caught myself feeling at home. Not in my old life, not in someone else's life, in my own. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't trying to fit into a role that had already been written for me. I wasn't trying to meet expectations that belonged to another chapter of my life. I was simply showing up as the person I had finally allowed myself to become. That realization didn't happen overnight. It arrived quietly, almost shyly, as if it didn't want to interrupt me. But once I recognized it, I knew there was no going back. Because I finally understood something that nobody had ever told me. Coming out late in life doesn't simply change your story. Sometimes it gives you permission to write a brand new one. Once I stopped trying to recreate my old life, something unexpected happened. I stopped asking, how do I get back to where I was? And I started asking a much better question. What kind of life do I actually want now? That single question changed everything. You see, for most of my life, I wasn't really designing my future. I was maintaining it. Like most people, I followed the path that was already in front of me. I got married, raised children, paid the bills, went to work, celebrated holidays, worried about the mortgage, cut the grass on Saturdays, and complained that the neighbor's dog barked too much. It wasn't a bad life. In many ways, it was a beautiful life. It gave me wonderful memories, incredible children, and experiences that I would never trade for anything. But when I came out later in life, something remarkable happened. For the first time, I realized that every decision ahead of me was mine to make. That realization was frightening at first, because freedom has a strange way of making you feel completely lost. We spend so many years wishing for freedom that we forget freedom comes with responsibility. Nobody was going to tell me what my new life should look like. There was no map. There was no schedule. There wasn't even a checklist. I had to build it one decision at a time. Some of those decisions were surprisingly ordinary. I found myself looking for a different church because I wanted to worship without feeling that half of me had to remain outside the building. I wasn't looking for a church that celebrated me. I simply wanted one that didn't ask me to apologize for existing. I eventually found one, and I still remember sitting through my first service thinking, is this what peace feels like? Nobody stared at me. Nobody whispered. Nobody asked me to become someone else before I could belong. I was just another man sitting in a pew, and after all those years, that felt extraordinary. Then there were the friendships. Starting over socially at 60 is a little like being the new student in high school, except nobody can remember where they parked their car. Making friends as an older adult is awkward. You don't walk up to another grown man and ask, "Would you like to be my friend?" Society somehow forgot to teach us how adults are supposed to do this. So you meet people one conversation at a time. You have coffee. You join a group. Someone introduces you to someone else. Before you know it, you have people calling just to ask how you're doing. And one afternoon, you realize your phone is ringing again. That may sound like a small thing. It isn't. Sometimes healing begins with hearing your phone ring because somebody genuinely wants to talk to you. Then came travel. I laughed when I realized how many places I had never considered visiting simply because they didn't belong to my previous life. Suddenly, I was discovering neighborhoods, cities, festivals, restaurants, and vacation destinations through completely different eyes. I wasn't trying to erase my past vacations. Those memories still belong to me. I was simply giving myself permission to create new ones. Traveling later in life is a completely different experience. When I was younger, I wanted excitement. Now, I just want a hotel mattress that doesn't feel like medieval punishment, and a bathroom with enough lighting to shave without accidentally removing an eyebrow. I also discovered something that made me smile. Every new experience reminded me that life hadn't stopped teaching me. I attended events I had never imagined attending. I met people whose lives were completely different from mine. Some had been out since they were teenagers. Others, like me, had arrived later in life, carrying decades of stories, responsibilities, mistakes, victories, heartbreaks, and wisdom. What connected us wasn't that our journeys were identical. What connected us was the simple understanding that every one of us had survived something. That realization humbled me. It also made me kinder. When you understand that everyone arrives carrying invisible luggage, you stop judging how fast they're walking. One of the greatest gifts of my new life has been learning that authenticity attracts different kinds of relationships. People no longer know me as the version of myself that was carefully edited to make everyone comfortable. They know me as I actually am. That doesn't mean everyone likes me. Believe me, if you've ever tried organizing a dinner reservation for 8 gay men, you'll quickly discover that disagreement is alive and well. But the friendships feel different. They're built on honesty instead of performance. That makes all the difference. Of course, not everything became magically perfect. I still have lonely days. I still question myself. I still make mistakes. There are mornings when I look in the mirror and wonder how my beard managed to turn white before I was emotionally ready for it. Growing older has a very twisted sense of humor. But here's the difference. Those difficult days no longer convince me that I made the wrong decision. They're simply part of being human. Looking back now, I can honestly say that coming out late in life didn't give me a perfect life. It gave me an honest one. There's a tremendous difference between those two things. An honest life still has disappointments. It still has awkward conversations. It still has loneliness from time to time. It still has bills, doctor's appointments, bad knees, and mornings when your back informs you that sleeping was apparently an extreme sport. But it also has something my old life was slowly running out of. It has peace. Not because everything is easy, because I no longer spend energy pretending to be someone I'm not. If someone had asked me 20 years ago what coming out would look like, I probably would have imagined one dramatic conversation followed by immediate happiness. Life, as usual, was much more complicated than that. The truth is that coming out wasn't one decision. It became hundreds of small decisions made over months and years. Each one added another brick to the life I was building. And today, when I look around, I don't see a replacement for my old life. I see a different one that I built with intention, one that reflects who I am today instead of who I thought I was expected to be. If you're watching this and you're standing at the beginning of your own journey, wondering whether it's too late to start over, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me. You're probably going to lose some things. That's true. But you are also going to discover parts of yourself that have been patiently waiting for decades to be introduced to the world. You'll find people who know only the real you. You'll create traditions that belong entirely to this chapter of your life. You'll visit places that would have meant nothing to you 20 years ago, but somehow feel like home today. And one day, without even realizing when it happened, you'll stop referring to it as your new life. It will simply become your life. I still smile when I think about how terrified I was in the beginning. If I could sit down with that frightened version of myself today, I'd probably put a hand on his shoulder and say, "Relax. You're going to be just fine." Also, buy comfortable shoes. Building a new life involves more walking than you think. And maybe that's the lesson I want to leave you with. Coming out late in life didn't erase my past. It didn't invalidate my marriage. It didn't erase the love I had for my family. It didn't cancel the years I spent becoming the man I am today. It simply gave me another chance to keep becoming him. If this story reminds you of your own journey, I'd love to hear about it. Tell me in the comments what surprised you most about rebuilding your life. Was it making new friends? Finding a new community? Learning to enjoy your own company? Or maybe you're still standing at the beginning, wondering if it's even possible. Whatever chapter you're in, you're welcome here. This is the Inner Closet, a safe space for mature gay men, late bloomers, and anyone who's discovered that life doesn't end when you finally tell the truth. It's a place where we share our stories without shame, laugh at ourselves because sometimes it's the healthiest thing we can do, and remind each other that it's never too late to build a life that finally feels like home. If this conversation meant something to you, subscribe, join us again, and until next time, be kind to yourself. You're building something beautiful, one day at a time.